the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. To the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. To the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And just take a moment to sort of recall or bring to mind our motivation for studying together today, particularly, bodhicitta motivation. So we'll turn to the text. And so we finished the whole section on like someone should say precious human rebirth, right? The sort of with all its different qualities and its great value and its difficulty of finding it and the various outlines. And now we're doing a section, the following section, which is sort of related to that. So we're sort of, it's still related, which is how to take the, so that once you realize, right, how precious your human life is, then this idea that we should take the essence of it, right, make it meaningful. And so then this section is how to take the section we're on is sort of how do you take the essence of your life, right, from a spiritual perspective or from a Buddhist perspective, right? And so we're in the section that's describing what they call the three, in this text they're translating it, they're saying three types of capable beings. So it's like three scopes or three levels or three, almost like scope, because it's how broad, the person's mind is, of spiritual practice, small, middle, and great. And so we covered already a couple things. One was that that really all the Buddhist teachings can be encompassed within those three scopes. Right? In other words, if you look at any Buddhist teaching, you can see where does it fit. It fits in one of those three. So we looked at that a bit, and then we covered a topic which was like so there's what they call it, high status or definite goodness, right? So the low scope is for attaining high status, which means not going to lower realms, right? And then the two other scopes, the middle scope and the great scope, are for attaining something definite, a version of nirvana, a version of permanent peace. With the middle scope being achieving that only, one is aiming to achieve that only for oneself. When the great scope, one is aiming to achieve that in order to be of benefit to all beings. So the great scope is great because of its the mind of the person practicing it has a compassion that includes all sentient beings and cherishes them as much as oneself, right? And has a sense of universal responsibility. So I'm just trying to remind you where we're at. So we're sort of looking at, we're looking at this whole idea of three scopes and how does that relate to taking the essence of your life. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says something. He says, so the goal is to achieve, at the bottom of page 44, he says, how great beings, right? So great beings here means somebody with a great scope, right? But that means like whoever generates bodhicitta, right? That kind of mind that encompasses all beings. He has a heading here where it says how they attain omniscience, which means how they attain Buddhahood. And he points out, so what he's saying here, and this is, I actually want to clarify this because sometimes people get confused on this point in terms of people who study Mahayana Buddhism and Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. Is he points out, he says there are two vehicles, right? So vehicle, vehicle is a translation of this word yana, right? So Mahayana, like sometimes they use these terms, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. Right, so all the yana in those means vehicle. So you could say that, and what they're getting at there is that, so Maha is great actually in Sanskrit. So if you say Mahayana, sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist." Right? So Maha is great, and Yana is vehicle. So a great vehicle Buddhist. So that means I'm either practicing or trying to practice the Buddhism of the great scope, right? With a mind that encompasses the welfare of all sentient beings. And then sometimes people get confused. So one thing is, so that with this idea of, sometimes people think of Vajrayana as something separate from Mahayana. And I want to clarify that because it's implied, well actually Lama Tsongkhapa says it here, is that, so the Buddhist Vajrayana practice, which I'm going to explain in a moment, just a little bit because it says it here, is not a separate thing from the Mahayana. It's like a subset of the Mahayana. Does that make sense? So it's part of the Mahayana tradition. That's one thing I wanted to point out. Does that make sense? So there is no Vajrayana Buddhism that's separate from Mahayana Buddhism. It's always a subset. So there are various kinds of Mahayana practitioners, and one kind of Mahayana practitioner is somebody who can practice Vajrayana. So that's the first thing I want to clarify. Second thing is I want to just clarify terms here, because as we go along, it can be confusing if you're not familiar. So, like here at Lama Tsongkhapa, and you're going to hear these other places if you study these topics, so it's good to know. There are different terms. So one is Vajrayana. Another that Lama Tsongkhapa uses in this verse, in this paragraph, is secret mantra. Then there's another term that's sometimes used, Tantra, right? Tantric Buddhism. And those are all synonyms. So it can get confusing if somebody says secret mantra, like if somebody says, oh yeah, now I know what Vajrayana is, but what's secret mantra? And so just to be clear, those are just different terms that are sometimes used in texts. So sometimes, and then there's another place here where he just says mantra, he leaves out the word secret. But so all of those are synonyms in this context. So when they're saying the practitioner of mantra, or practitioner of secret mantra, or practitioner of Vajrayana, or practitioner of Tantra, or Tantrayana, sometimes they say, those are just all synonyms. So they're all different ways of saying the same thing. So they're all describing a certain kind of Mahayana practice. So that's that part. And so what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is those who have the great scope, right, because that's what topic we're up to now, he says some will practice what he calls the perfections, right? So that's in that verse we just did, right, where it says, I go for refuge, become enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, through the practice of giving and the other perfections, right? So there are 6 perfections, right? Actually, I prefer, as I think about it, really a better translation is generosity for the first one, because it's a mind. Just to clarify that, I mean, giving implies actually handing somebody something. Generosity is a state of mind of taking joy in giving, and the perfection of generosity is really that. There is that one does give, but there is for example, because if somebody's I could give you something wanting something back, that's not the perfection of generosity. That's not with a generous heart, right? If I give you something sort of trying to manipulate you, or if I give you something, if I give somebody something hoping you can give me a job or something like that, that's business. That's not generosity, So really the perfection of generosity is a heart that enjoys giving, and then giving with that kind of state of mind. So just to clarify that. But so what this is saying is that there's one, the general Mahayana practitioner, right, who's not practicing secret mantra, to use this term, right, generates bodhicitta, right, which is that, right, the mind that has, first of all, has love for all sentient beings, then has compassion for all sentient beings, then has that sense of universal responsibility, altruistic responsibility, that feels, I myself want to benefit all sentient beings. I take responsibility, actually. Like a parent, they use the metaphor, like a mother for her child. One feels that way for all sentient beings, some sense of responsibility. And then one generates bodhicitta, right, the wish to achieve enlightenment in order to be a benefit to all sentient beings. So what this is saying is, having achieved that bodhicitta mind, right, some practitioners will then exclusively practice the perfections, right? And so those are six: generosity, giving, ethics, patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. And so, and it's said that that's, for example, Shakyamuni Buddha, right? The Buddha, the historical Buddha. It's said that he practiced those six perfections for 3 countless great eons in order to become a Buddha. That's the Buddhist view of how long it took. So he started like an ordinary person, like us. This is right, and then the idea is he gave rise to that bodhicitta mind, and then he started practicing those 6 perfections, and he very gradually improved. You know, what's the word? Like he was like a personal process of evolution, right? Higher and higher levels of what's the word? Inner transformation, and after 3 countless great eons, he became a Buddha, and then benefited the world in the ways that a Buddha can. And so then you might say, so what's this secret mantra, right? So the idea there is this, just to clarify what Lama Tsongkhapa is getting at. The idea is this. So the idea of secret mantra or Vajrayana is that it's a faster vehicle, a faster path to the same goal. So the goal is the same. It's Buddhahood. But the idea is that actually, so I'll use the term bodhisattva. Right? So a bodhisattva is somebody who has realized bodhicitta, this mind of wishing to achieve enlightenment for all beings. So the idea is that some bodhisattvas, right? So some beings who have realized bodhicitta, their compassion for others is so overwhelming, or so sometimes Lama Zopa uses unbearable, this term Lama Zopa Rinpoche sometimes uses, or so powerful that they feel it's I can't wait 3 countless great, even though I would, for my own side, I would happily practice whatever I can to benefit others. Like for others to wait that long for me to become enlightened, and I'm not really able to help them much, I can't bear that. And so that practitioner then says, they look for a faster path to enlightenment because they feel it's others can't wait. You know what I mean? It's almost like a metaphor for that could be, sometimes it's used as like, if it's the feeling is like if one saw one's own child drowning, that one couldn't say, well, in 3 countless great eons, I'll save them. Right? The feeling is like I have to be able to do it now somehow. At whatever is required, I'll do it because it's so unbearable to see others suffering so much. So I have to achieve enlightenment quickly. And the idea is that this idea of sort of spiritually progressing or evolving over eons. So the Bodhisattva really feels that. So Islam often says that they feel, for my own side, I would do it however long it takes. But to take that long, it really feels like unbearable, basically, is the idea, right? That if there's any way to achieve enlightenment more quickly, then I'll do that. And so, so then this idea of this vehicle of the Vajrayana or the secret mantra, the idea is so the practitioner enters into that particular way of practicing the Mahayana because it's faster, and so they can achieve enlightenment more quickly. We'll go into a little more. Lama Tsongkhapa gives a little more information about the Vajrayana on the next page, so we'll go into that too. But here, so it says, and then I want to clarify something else. So then it says, so in both cases, right, the person is aiming for enlightenment in order to bring the suffering of all sentient beings to an end. Right, that's their motivation. He says, so then the people who are practicing the vehicle of the perfections, right, practice the 6 perfections. And then he mentions something. He says the others practice what he calls the 2 stages. And just so that people know what he's talking about. Maybe I should explain that. Okay. Trying to see if there's another. think there was another place where it goes into more about that. Okay, I'll explain what the two stages are later because it comes up again later. So I'll go into that when we get to it later because he gives a little more detail a few pages later in the text. So we'll discuss what are the two stages in a little bit. Okay, so I'll just pause there. So, any questions? I just want to make sure people are clear because sometimes people get confused and they say like, "Oh, what is this?" Like, with the terms and all that. So, are people clear now, like what these terms are? So, like Mahayana and then Vajrayana, and then these other like secret mantras and a synonym. Like, I just want to make sure as you're reading, it's going to be confusing if you don't know what he means. Like, so is that pretty clear now? Just that part. And then I'll just read this very beautiful quote from The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, which was the sort of root text by Atisha of the Lamrim, where he quotes at the bottom and 44, "He whose own mind is affected by suffering, who thus yearns to bring an end to all the suffering of others completely, such a one is a superior being." So he's saying, in this context, what makes somebody superior isn't their wealth or their physical appearance or their popularity. It's the level of compassion in their heart. And the person who's spiritually great in that sense is the person who's given rise to bodhicitta. Then Lama Tsongkhapa just points out that this idea, he points out, like this idea of, I just want to clarify something else that he says here too. This idea of the three scopes or three types of capable beings, Lama Tsongkhapa points out here that he's pointing out actually that this isn't something he's making up himself, right? So first of all, Atisha used those terms, who was an great Indian Buddhist master in his Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. But Lama Tsongkhapa was pointing out, Atisha didn't make that up either. It comes from more ancient teaching. So the compendium, so he quotes he mentions a few different texts by Asanga, another great Indian master. So he's pointing out that there's a valid lineage of this explanation. Actually, quite important. Like one thing that Lama Tsongkhapa often does, if you look at any of his texts, and you see it throughout this text, I'll just mention it, is he often, very often, if you see throughout the text, quotes Indian Buddhist masters, just like His Holiness the Dalai Lama does. If you ever hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama talk, I point here because he gave Kensher Rinpoche Center in Connecticut, and Kensher Rinpoche made a copy for us, a picture of the 17 Pandits of Nalanda. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says, he actually says he doesn't like the term Tibetan Buddhism, because there is, he says, it would imply as if the Tibetans made something up. And he says, actually, we're the holders of the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. So His Holiness points out that there was the Buddha in India, and then these great masters who arose later, particularly for the Mahayana tradition, the most important center of practice and learning was Nalanda, which was actually like the greatest Buddhist university in history. And people came from all over Asia, from China, Tibet, Mongolia. I don't know, actually, Mongolia was a bit later, so they came to Tibet, but came from Bhutan, all different parts of, and then also from the South India, there to study. So it was the greatest center of learning in Buddhist history. And so he points out that that was where most of the most important explanations of the Buddha's teachings were written. And so it only says, Tibet is the holder of the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. And then he points out that it's a very complete version, because it has all these different scopes, and there is a Nalanda included practice of the, somebody of all these different scopes, right? So it includes texts that teach about, if one wants only one's own liberation, it teaches about that. If one wants to practice Mahayana, it teaches about that. If one wants to practice Vajrayana, it teaches about that. So all these different texts and teachings were there, oral traditions and written traditions, and those were preserved in Tibet, and they were wiped out later in India. So Tibet is the place that kind of preserved the most of those teachings. So anyway, Lama Tsongkhapa often quotes Indian masters, and I think he was very similar to those Dalai Lama in that way. He was trying to point out that the teaching should have a root. This is Buddhism, so it should be able to be traced back to the Buddha, right? It shouldn't be something that somebody made up or just had a vision of. And Lama Tsongkhapa himself actually oftentimes had visions of different deities, and they would have these visionary teachings. But if you look at his teachings, he never says, "Oh, somebody told me in a vision this or that." His view was that if it can't be traced back to the Buddha, then it's not Buddhism. So if he had a vision that told him something, it was like, well, let me see if that's Buddhist teaching, right? He still would check, right? So anyway, it has to. So he quotes these Indian Buddhist masters. And then we'll keep going through the text, right? So, and then when he says, he has this, which the outline calls clearing up a doubt. And he says, I'll just read it because he says, although with regard to lesser beings, right? So he's back now to low scope beings. He says there are both those who devote themselves to this life and those who devote themselves to future lives. And he says, so what he's saying in this one line here is that there are some like lowest. We said this last time actually, or a couple times ago. There are some who are like the lowest of the low scope, who are only, we said that right, like animals, who only are concerned with their own comfort in this life. And then he says, he acknowledges there are many such people. I'm not talking about them because that's not a spiritual. This text is about spiritual practice. That's not spiritual practice. So he's saying there are, of course, such beings, but they're not relevant in terms of the scopes of spiritual practice. They're really not relevant to that. So I'm not going to discuss them. I'm beginning with the bottom rung of spiritual practice, which is somebody who is concerned about something beyond this life, their future lives. So he's just clarifying a doubt in case we're confused about that. And then he goes a little further. He says here, so he points out something else which is important. He says that he's going to go into more detail about in a minute, in a few pages, but he points out that these other two scopes, right? So the scope of wanting a good future life and the scope of wanting liberation. He says, actually, those are encompassed within the Mahayana, whereas Mahayana practitioners also have to practice these things. And there are trainings of a Mahayana practitioner as well. And he says, so all of these will be included in this text. Although this text is mainly a Mahayana text, right? Those other practices are included because bodhisattvas have to practice those things too. And then he says something which I think is almost funny. He says, on the other hand, somebody who makes only their own comfort in this life their main concern, basically says there's nothing, that's not in common with the Mahayana, there's nothing to really teach about that. So he kind of says that's not relevant, really. And then he says something else. Which is that, and this is kind of important, so I want to go through this now. So like the idea of let's start with the low scope, right? So the low scope is wishing to achieve a good future rebirth. Right? And so part of what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is a few things. One is, actually I'll say it the way Kensho Rishi says, if you think you want to practice the Mahayana, but then you don't for example, practice the low scope of guarding karma, right? Taking refuge and being careful with your karmic actions, then the result of that is that you'll be reborn in the lower realms. That's the Buddhist perspective, right? And then to say, well, I'm going to practice Mahayana seems quite silly. Then you'll just be miserable and you won't be able to do anything for anybody. And if you want to continue practicing and growing, and progressing on your spiritual practice, you have to, the most foundational thing is you have to practice good karma, right? Not creating negative karma. And so one way of viewing this point is those basic teachings, for example, on karma, are totally required if you're going to practice the Mahayana. One is, how are you going to help others if you don't understand karma, right? Because that's the way beings become happier. But the other is so we say this, it's to use again, I'm using a metaphor for a moment. If you are drowning yourself, you can't help somebody else from drowning, right? Like you have to be able to swim or have a life vest or something in order to be able to then help somebody else out of the water. Right? And the idea here is if you don't guard your own karma, then you're the person. It's like you're the person who says, "Oh, there are all these people drowning," and you run out and you end up you're drowning, and then you grab them and you pull them down as you're going down. So the idea here is like if you're serious about practicing Mahayana, then you have to guard karma, for example, right? You have to know how to take refuge. You have to know these foundational practices. That's one, and then another is like then the idea of liberation, right? And what Lama Tsongkhapa says here is, of course, there are some practitioners who only are aiming for their own liberation from samsara, right? And then he says, but bodhisattvas also want to be liberated from samsara. Right? In other words, they have to understand the suffering of samsara in order to want to be liberated from it. And this comes more on the next page, actually, but I'll say it now. Like, so actually, it's often said in the teachings, if you don't understand your own suffering, you can't understand the suffering of others. And so sometimes this happens, like where, and this becomes like, what's sort of say this? There's in some other text, there's a term like what's sort of say this? Like almost like there's the right term for this. That there's like a actual Mahayana practitioner, and then there's somebody who's just like a what's the word? Designated Mahayana. Like so somebody says, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist, right? That's just as a designation, like a ascription. Kind of like I'm a American citizen, or I'm a resident of Virginia or something like that. Right? So just because you have this term, like you self-identify, right? I'm a Mahayana Buddhist. If you put that on like a form, right? What's your religious affiliation? That doesn't mean you're actually practicing the Mahayana in the sense of have bodhicitta, right? A true Mahayanist is somebody who's realized bodhicitta. But then you could say, I practice Mahayana. But that you see the difference? Like, there's one thing. It's like it's a self-identification, which is fine, but that's different than actually practicing it, which means having bodhicitta in your heart. And so, one thing that sort of Lama Tsongkhapa is beginning now to go into is, if you don't understand the suffering of others, of yourself rather to start with, right? If you don't understand like how you suffer, then to say, oh, I'm going to benefit all other beings from their and free them from their suffering, is sort of superficial, right? Because you don't really understand their suffering, actually. So if you really, and this is like empathy, right? In other words, if you're going to really empathize with others, you have to be willing to face reality, right? You have to be willing to face somebody's suffering, and that's hard, isn't it? I'm just going off on a little bit of a tangent just for a moment, but like people don't really want to do that oftentimes, right? And that's what bodhisattvas do want to do, right? Whereas like it's to actually look at, how should I say it? Like how horrible, really, right? How horrible things can get, and if you're ignoring your own suffering in that way, right? If you don't recognize, wow, like it can really be, samsara can really be horrific. And then when you see others, like your version of compassion is like, oh, I'll just cheer you up, something like that. That's not Mahayanist, right? Mahayana is like, you're willing to look at the most dark, frightening, upsetting, terrifying aspects of your own and others' lives and transform yourself into somebody who can actually help with that, right? That's very profound. And so I'm just sort of going off on a little bit of like a reflection on what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here. But so this idea then, like, because we're going to go into this sometimes in this text where you're contemplating the suffering of lower realms and the suffering of, and what Lama Tsongkhapa is, and the sufferings of samsara, and there are different lists. There's 3 sufferings, or 6 sufferings, or 8 sufferings, or there are these different lists. And sometimes, like, if you don't understand what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, sometimes people can think, oh, I don't like this, it's too much. It's too much, it's too negative or something like that. But what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is like, so we say this, like, that those things are prerequisites actually for being a true Mahayana practitioner. There is the willingness to sort of face all of that and sort of feel it in a way, you know, to be willing to feel and look at, okay, what are the kinds of sufferings I have? What are the kinds of mental afflictions I have? What are the kinds of bad things that not that other people do, but that they're in my own heart, you know, or something like that. That if I'm not willing to do that, then to say, oh, I'm going to liberate all sentient beings from their terrible suffering, is just words. Does that make sense? And I'll say one more. I was going to save it for later, but something the Dalai Lama points out. He says, you know, looking at your own suffering and developing renunciation, and then this mind of bodhicitta, he says they're just two sides of the same coin. You know, that if once you understand your own suffering deeply, then it's quite easy. You just have to stop and say, look at others then and say, oh my goodness, they're subject to all the same stuff as me. You know, but if you haven't faced your own suffering and afflictions and all that in a very honest way, then you can't face the suffering of others in a very deep and honest way. That's what this is getting at in part. Any questions about that? We'll go into it a little more, but I just want to pause. Any questions or comments about it?
The intermediate scope about liberation, how do you make that not about ego, because that's yourself trying to liberate?
Mm-hmm.
So how does I reconcile that with, if it's about ego, then it's actually an affliction rather than in pursuit of liberation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like the person who's, I guess we have to differentiate two different things. Like also, first of all, there's like, for the intermediate scope, right, there's like, there are some practitioners, this is what this is teaching right now, there are some practitioners who are, their main objective is great scope, right? But then their practice, they're focusing on the middle scope, that intermediate scope for a while, right, in order to, almost like, you know, in this analogy, it would be like, if a person I'm going to give an analogy for that kind of person, first of all. So that person, let's say somebody wants to go to medical school. I'm just using a metaphor from it. And because they want to help other people, right? But then they have to study, you have to get a good grades in undergraduate before you can get into medical school, right? So that person would be, let's say that, you know, the analogy would be, so somebody's an undergraduate and they're studying, calculus, right? So you could look at that person for a moment and say, well, how is studying calculus going to help them be a better doctor with somebody who's sick and suffering? And you would say, well, it's part of the coursework to get to become what they want to be. And so in that moment, and that person, you know, in the moment, they're focusing, I'm just using a metaphor for it. In that moment, they're focusing on calculus, right, or something. But in their heart, they're thinking, I'm doing this because I want to later help people as a doctor, and I have to get good grades, so okay, I'm going to study this topic, you know. So the analogy there would be the person who's aspiring truly to the Mahayana, then they'll be doing the meditations on the middle scope, for example, the kinds of suffering, the 8 kinds. Let's say they're meditating on the 8 kinds of suffering in samsara in order to develop a sense of renunciation of samsara. But in the back, so at that time, they're focusing really on their own suffering, you know, and looking at it honestly. But in the back of their mind, they're like that person, they're thinking, you know, oh, once I generate renunciation, then I'll really be able to generate bodhicitta and help others. How wonderful. That's what their underlying motivation is. So for that person, there's no question in a sense about that, because it's like they know they're doing this in order to get to, they're like, I can't really be a true Mahayanist until I face these things, so I better face them now and really meditate deeply on them so I can truly become a bodhisattva. You know, so for that person, it's like it's clear in that way. Does that make sense? But then there's other people, and Lama Tsongkhapa says this here. There are other people who are let's say they're practicing exclusively, only that middle scope. So they don't have any interest, in becoming a bodhisattva. So for that person, when they're contemplating their own suffering, in a sense, there is a certain amount of ego involved in that, right? Because they're thinking, I don't want to keep suffering like that. I don't want to have this suffering. I don't want to have that suffering. I'm tired of this. I want to achieve liberation, and I want to be free from it. This cycle of misery. Right? So there is some ego for that person then, and the idea is that actually, because now you have to differentiate a little bit the meaning of ego, is that there's actually two aspects. Ego is a kind of term in English, right? But in Buddhist psychology, there's a differentiation between two. In Mahayana Buddhist psychology, there's a differentiation between two different aspects of ego. Let's say, so one is what they call self-grasping. That's grasping at an inherently or truly existent self. And then there's self-centeredness, kind of cherishing or thinking more about oneself thinking oneself is more important than others, basically. So of those two, so the person who's practicing the middle scope, when they're thinking about suffering and developing renunciation, they actually have both of those at that point, right? They have both self-grasping and self-centeredness, selfishness. That person, as they progress further, once they develop their renunciation, and then they progress along the path towards their own liberation, they eventually come to a point where, because they cultivate meditative concentration, and wisdom. And their wisdom eventually, that person who really practices successfully that middle scope, but doesn't become Mahayana, right? Their wisdom eventually destroys self-grasping. So they no longer grasp at an independent self at a certain point. They overcome that through their wisdom. But they don't really fully overcome self-centeredness. So they still have, in other words, at that point, when they sort of progress quite high along, if that person was exclusively practicing the intermediate scope, as they progress further along that path, there comes a point where they really do destroy self-grasping, and they no longer grasp at an independent self. But out of old habit, essentially, they still have a tendency to view their own well-being as more important than others' well-being, and so they don't do the vast activities of a bodhisattva. So in that sense, it's like if you want to call those the two halves of ego, that person begins the path with both halves of ego, but at the end of their path, they only have they've destroyed the half that's self-grasping, but the self-centeredness half of ego, it takes bodhicitta actually to destroy that, and that person doesn't cultivate bodhicitta, so they never, I mean, maybe never is the wrong word, but on that path they don't destroy that. Does that? I don't know. So next, we'll look at the next section, which is he's getting into the let's say this, like he's really exploring bodhicitta now, let's say. And this is important because I want to explain why this is important, this topic, and why it's included at this point in the text, right? We were looking at how do you take the essence of your life? And he's answering that question now. He's saying the best way to take the essence of your life is bodhicitta. Right? And basically what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is, I'm about to go into a whole bunch of stuff that's preliminary to bodhicitta, right? But he's warning you. He's saying, warning, or preparing you, or giving you a heads up, let's call it that. So this is sort of Lama Tsongkhapa's heads up. What he's saying is, I'm about to go into a whole bunch of topics that are not explicitly about bodhicitta. They're about the low scope and the middle scope, right? Because we're going to go in order. And he's saying, but listen, I want you to be like that person, using my metaphor from earlier, I want you to be like that guy who wants to go, or the woman who was trying to get to medical school, right? I want you to be somebody who understands, I'm doing all of this in order to become a bodhisattva, right? So I'm training in these more preliminary trainings in order to then generate bodhicitta and be a Mahayana, a true Mahayana practitioner. And so he's now going to go into a little bit explaining more about bodhicitta and explaining how you should view these other trainings as part of your bodhisattva aspiration, and as part of your training in becoming a bodhisattva. Does that make sense? And so it's really quite an important point, because then as we explore those other topics, we're going to know in the back of our mind, oh great, I'm understanding this, so then I'll become closer to, but I'm not, this isn't my, and there's another metaphor or way of saying it, is then for us, those other I just gave that point where I said some people practice the middle scope, but they're aiming towards the great scope, others are exclusively practicing, right? And what he's saying here is, be like the person where this, and he uses another term later, kind of like, it's a path, there's a path of the low scope, and there's the path shared with the low scope. And he says, be somebody where it's shared with. In other words, and it's like this, it's like, I'll give one, I'm using a lot of metaphors, I like that, I like metaphors, I guess, but shared with means this. Like, if I say I'm driving to California, and you say, oh, I want to get to Ohio, I might say, oh, why don't we go together to Ohio, I'll drop you off and I'll keep going, right? So the path from here to Ohio is shared, right? The rest of my path to California, I won't be sharing with that person, right? And that's what he's saying, be like that. So I'm going to Buddhahood. I'm going the Mahayana, vehicle, and that's my aim, right? But still, in order to get there, you have to go through. Whereas if you say if you say I'm going across the country, that doesn't mean you're suddenly in California, right? You have to start with start on 66 going west or something. So the idea would be make these other paths shared, right? You're sharing them with the person who's only. There are some people who are only practicing to have good future rebirths, so I'm sharing that path with them. I also have to traverse that, but I'm going further than that. Is my aspiration, and that we should have that kind of mind even as we practice those other paths. So does that make sense? So it's like that's the meaning of shared with, right? And actually, so it'd be like three, right? So if one person's stopping in Ohio, somebody else is stopping in South Dakota, and then I'm going to whatever, it's like that. So okay, I'll go along this far with this person, and that, then they'll get out, and I'll go that far with those person, they'll get out, but I'm going all the way to the end. Is the idea? That's the metaphor of the share. It's actually a good metaphor, right? Because shared with, that's what a vehicle shared with them, right? Or a path shared with them is like that. Does that make sense? So anyway, we'll get into more later. Okay, so now he's saying, about bodhicitta, right? Now, and this is like the most important topic, actually, bodhicitta. So he's going to make some points about bodhicitta now. So the first one is, and we already said this, it's the entry gate to the Mahayana. I was pausing, I'll share. Yubei Kensho Rinpoche oftentimes has taught and sometimes teach at the center. And I remember one time, Buchung, his translator, said, like Kensho Rinpoche was teaching about bodhicitta over and over and over, like all the time, like was always teaching about bodhicitta. And Buchung told me this, he was very humble and sweet, and he said, one day I was kind of like, oh, I'm getting tired of translating that. And he went to him and he said, why are we having to do so much about bodhicitta? It's like, you've already said that kind of thing, And Kensho Rinpoche said, there's only one door, so I have to keep knocking. Because he was saying the same thing as here, right? It's the only way, it's the only entry gate to the Mahayana. So, another way of saying is, once you realize, I'll stop there is no other way to practice the Mahayana other than bodhicitta. If you don't have that kind of mind, then there is no Mahayana. And then you could be doing, there's many stories like you could be doing the most advanced Mahayana practices and Vajrayana practices and all that, and you're not even, you can say, oh, I'm doing these very advanced practices, but if you don't have bodhicitta, they're not Mahayana practices at all, actually. So although you'd be saying I'm doing the most advanced practices, they're actually not practices of Mahayana. They're not yet even any practice of Mahayana. So it's the only, and door is a metaphor, right? In other words, if you don't have the bodhicitta in your heart and experience, then whatever you're doing is not Mahayana, really, practice. And then he quotes Shantideva's engaging in the bodhisattva conduct, or guides the bodhisattva way of life. It says, when bodhicitta has arisen, at once the wretched, bound in the prison of psychic existence, of samsara, are called children of those gone to bliss. And so what it's saying is, that's us, right? Like, in other words, what he says, wretched ones bound in samsara, that's a reference to us, right? That's Shantideva's view of it. Who are we? Who are we? We're wretched beings bound in samsara. And then he says, what he's saying is, the moment you give rise to bodhicitta, you become a child of the Buddhas, of those gone to bliss. That's an epithet of the Buddha. What does that mean, right? Or he's like, well, it could have a couple meanings. One is like, in the sense that then you enter their, actually the most important meaning of that is like, when you generate bodhicitta, right, you become a child of the Buddhas in the sense that you're then going to grow up to be a Buddha. Right? You're going to grow and become a Buddha yourself eventually. And the Buddhas then sort of view you that way. Right? They say, oh, this is one of our children who's going to grow up and become enlightened as well. Okay, so that's that benefit, right? You become a Mahayanist, an actual Mahayanist, you become a Bodhisattva, and you become a child of the Buddhas. And then the next point Lama Tsongkhapa makes here is he actually, this is the same point that Shantideva makes extensively in his teaching, is that if you want to generate bodhicitta, right, I'm going to say that, like, to generate bodhicitta is not so easy, right? In other words, if it were easy, then you'd go out and find, everybody would already be bodhisattvas, right? And so he's saying, if you want to generate bodhicitta, it takes effort, like anything meaningful. And he says, so the first step is to contemplate the benefits of bodhicitta. Whereas, why would you make that? You have to understand, why would I want to bother making all that effort, right, to practice and so on. And he says, so you have to understand the benefits of it in order to give rise to it. And so he says here, contemplate the benefits, and then do the 7-limb practice and take refuge, which we taught earlier, right, in the preliminaries. We went through what's the 7 limbs, but here he's focusing on contemplating the benefits. I just want to say something, like that, with many different Buddhist trainings, actually, that's how it works. And actually, this is how psychology, just what he's pointing out is something very basic to psychology, is we don't do something unless we see some reason to do it, right? And sometimes our reasons are foolish, stupid, but, and sometimes what we think we want to do is a bad decision, but still we think it's going to benefit, right? In other words, nobody does something unless they think somehow it's going to do something for them, right? And oftentimes, like, we're motivated by what? Either by our own, like, in other words, desire sort of exaggerates things. We say, I want this, or we're influenced by advertising or by other people's opinions, and we somehow come to an idea that something's valuable and we pursue it. And oftentimes, the results are good or bad, depending on what we're doing. But what he's saying here is, so that's a basic psychological truth, is that beings do whatever they think will benefit. And he's saying, so if you contemplate extensively the benefits of bodhicitta and you understand them, then your motivation will become spontaneous and natural, and you'll want to generate bodhicitta. So then he says, so of course, having said that, then he says, so what are some of the benefits of bodhicitta? And actually, well, first of all, I'll say this. I mean, this is just one paragraph. The benefits of bodhicitta, it's actually said, are a huge topic. Actually, we could actually spend months and years just talking about that, I think. So these are for contemplation, first of all. Does that make sense? Or this isn't just intellectual. The idea is you would actually contemplate this in order to generate that aspiration for bodhicitta. And before I get into we'll go through everything that Lama Tsongkhapa says here, but I want to say first, like, if you think about it just yourself, if you start by contemplating, okay, so what's bodhicitta, right? So bodhicitta is the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all beings, that's grounded in universal love and compassion. So actually the benefits are very extensive, right? Like, but the first thing is this: is like one idea is that bodhicitta benefits you and also benefits others. Right? Whereas it's a cause for your own happiness and it's also a cause for others' happiness. At the minimum, you stop bothering others so much if you generate bodhicitta. Right? You become, you don't go around killing them and torturing them and whatever, hurting them in various ways, which is what we do a lot of in the world. So just that alone, right, is a huge benefit. So the Lama Tsongkhapa I don't think goes into that, but I just want, to me that's almost like the most basic benefit, right, is like, what's there to say it, like, actually if you think about it, right, because like we ourselves cause a lot of trouble, actually, for others. It's true, and the idea is that the more you cultivate bodhicitta, the less, that's just a natural side effect, is the less trouble you cause for others. And that alone would be wonderful, right? Like that alone you can say, oh, bodhicitta is really great. Because actually, like when somebody really annoys you, which, people do, right? Then you can think, oh, if they had bodhicitta, then they wouldn't be annoying me. May they generate bodhicitta. Like, it's the best way to stop annoying others. So that's the first point. Lama Tsongkhapa says here, there are temporary benefits of bodhicitta and there are ultimate benefits of bodhicitta. So temporary in this sense means like, let's just say this. Means not ultimate. So it means it's not a state of enlightenment. That's the point. Temporary in that sense. That's the meaning of that. And so he starts with the very first one, which is you yourself, if you generate bodhicitta, won't fall into the lower realms, but will be reborn in happy realms, right? And so what he's saying there, and this is important, is that if you have bodhicitta, then you don't have to worry anymore about going to, whereas in the low scope, right, there's the fear of the lower realms and fear of being reborn in a negative state. And actually, in Buddhism, there are a lot of things, right, practices like to, for the time of death, to protect you from bad rebirths and things like that. And, but the idea is, it was very clear in Buddhism, is if you've generated bodhicitta, you don't need somebody else or some ritual or somebody else to help you at the time of death. Bodhicitta itself helps you. In other words, you don't have to worry. Because if you're dying with bodhicitta in your heart, then the metaphor they say is then death and rebirth are like changing your clothes. There's no problem. For a self-centered being, right, for a selfish person, death is horrifying, right? Because you feel like, it's like, well, the world revolves around me. How can I end? This is tragic. This is terrible. Everybody else dies, but me? That's like unbearable. For a bodhisattva, right, for somebody who's generated bodhicitta, it's like, the feeling is, like, I don't cherish I live for others. Like, the feeling is, may I go wherever I'll be of most benefit. And if you die with that kind of feeling, then there's no question about it. So you don't need somebody, it's like rituals like poa, right? This idea, like different rituals in Tibetan Buddhism. What this is saying, what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is true, actually, is if you have bodhicitta, you don't need somebody else to come and do some ritual for you. You don't have to do some secret anything. You don't have to have somebody praying, or, like, bodhicitta itself is the best protection, actually, for the time of death. And actually, bodhicitta is the only thing, like, if you think about it, right, like, when you're dying, anything else you lose at that point, right? In other words, like your possessions, your relationships, but actually bodhicitta doesn't get lost, right? It's in your heart. So even as you die, you can go into death with bodhicitta, and then that carries you through to your next birth, actually. They say whatever motivation you have in your mind at the time of death is what impels the karma for your next life. So if you're dying with love and compassion in your heart, then it's love and compassion that impel you forward, and you go someplace wonderful. There's a story that reminds me of where there was it was Geshe Putawa, who had such strong bodhicitta that when he was dying, he was praying like, may I be reborn in the lower realms to help others. Like that was his wish, because he just so had, his compassion was, and then he had a vision that he was going to go to a pure land of the Buddha, and he said, oh no, I wanted to go help others. But it's like, the point of that story is that if you have that kind of love and compassion, because actually the lower realms were made from hatred, right? They're made from ignorance. They're made from self-centered desire. Right? So a bodhisattva whose main mind is completely filled with love and compassion, their mind can't create that kind of experience for themselves. They can maybe, whatever, go visit to help other people, but that's not their, whereas they wouldn't, that's not their, they don't have the karma to experience that. And so naturally, bodhicitta leads you to happy realms. Then he says, once this mind, meaning bodhicitta, has arisen, the causes of miserable existences, like of lower realm rebirths, accumulated previously are purified, and the continuity of those accumulated later on is cut. Right? And so he's making two different points here. One is, actually it's important too, like there's a line in another text that says, bodhicitta is the best method of purification. And so that's one point he's making, right, is that if you have negative karma, right, like, there are many rituals we can do, like, reciting mantras or doing prostrations or to purify our karma. What he's saying is, if you have bodhicitta, that's the best method to purify your karma. Then whatever you do, you're purifying your karma. That's one, because the main factor is there's the most powerful factor for purifying karma is bodhicitta itself. If you go through the 4 powers, which we'll cover later, and how to purify karma, bodhicitta is the most important one. And then he's saying also, so you'll purify karma naturally once you generate bodhicitta all the time, and then even if you'll still have some negative karma, right? But this is important too. Like I got into this just a little bit earlier. Like so when somebody's dying, it's their mental state that activates a karma. This is the basic Buddhist teaching on the death process. Is that it's the mental state as you're approaching death that sort of, you have all these different karmic seeds, and then depending on what your mental state is when you're dying, it sort of activates a karmic seed that determines your next rebirth. And so part of what Lama Tsongkhapa is also saying is that once you have bodhicitta, if it's not like you have immediately purified all of your past negative karma, but you'll be purifying it as you go along naturally, and then whatever negative karma you do have, it won't be activated as when you at the time of death, because you won't have a negative mind, right? In other words, if you're dying and you generate hatred, for example, then it would activate some very heavy negative karma. If you're dying with extreme regret or like grasping at your friends or family or possessions, it will activate negative karmic seeds, they would say. But if you're dying with love and compassion and bodhicitta in your heart, then it won't activate those seeds, so they won't cause you to be reborn in lower realms. That's another benefit, natural benefit of bodhicitta. Then he says, the causes of happy realms, meaning of good rebirths, accumulated previously, because they're now connected with bodhicitta, increase extensively, and the new ones created, due to being motivated by it, become unlimited. So this is important too, right? The idea here is that ordinary people who don't have bodhicitta do positive things sometimes, right? But they're very limited, right? Like, so, you may practice generosity, right? But your mind is just saying, I don't want my friend to suffer, so I'll give them something. That's good karma, right? But it's a very small good karma, right? What your actual motivation is, may my friend not suffer this week, right? That's nice, but it's small. Right? When a bodhisattva, right, has bodhicitta, when they give something, their heart isn't like that. It's not small. Their heart is saying, I'm giving this now, and they're feeling in their heart, not just intellectually, but like the feeling is, I'm so happy to give this, and may I eventually lead this being, may I become enlightened and be able to lead this being to enlightenment. So it's an infinite, and may I be able to lead all beings to enlightenment, right? So the aspiration both for that one person you're giving to, and then also is enlightenment itself, which is infinite. And then you have this underlying enlightenment wish to lead all beings to enlightenment. So you get the idea it's an infinite state of mind. So the merit created is infinite. The positivity in it is infinite. And that's what he's saying here is like, and actually it's very true. So this is like, and again, I'm just getting into it. So bodhicitta is the best way to create good karma, too. And the idea is that, so we say this, like, a bodhisattva, right, with bodhicitta, giving one person an apple, creates creates karma as though they gave all sentient beings an apple or something. It's like, and an infinite number of apples, because whatever. The point is like, it's infinite, because their mind is in, right? The main factor that determines karma is the state of mind of the person doing the action. Right? So remember, what is bodhicitta, right? Bodhicitta is the wish to achieve a state of Buddhahood, right? Which is an infinite state, in a sense, in order to be of infinite benefit to infinite sentient beings. Right? And so the bodhisattva, whenever they do anything, that's their motivation. So they're naturally creating infinite good karma just by doing anything, actually. And I'll say that too. If you, I mean, it's hard to get this idea. Maybe I don't like, but if you, I'll say it just from my own experience. If you spend time with somebody who's a bodhisattva, like or a Buddha, or we'll say a bodhisattva, you start to see that actually. Like there was like. So we say it like that whatever they're doing has this incredible energy, this incredible goodness to it. Where you feel like, you know, like how it feels, I'll just give it a, you know, like if you've ever seen like on TV or been there, like when, very rarely it'll happen, right, where like huge number of people come together to pray for something positive, and maybe there's like a, you know, 100,000 people on whatever, somewhere, a National Mall or someplace, right, and they're all like doing, like, you know, and there's a feeling of like, what's it say, when you're with a lot of people, if there were like 100,000 people all meditating on love, there's a certain feeling that comes. But if you meditate on love next to a bodhisattva, it's actually more powerful than that. That's, I guess, my point. Because their mind is bigger than 100,000 other people meditating on love. Their aspiration is bigger. I'm not putting the other people down or something, but it's the mind of that person is so vast. So I'm just sort of elaborating on what Tsongkhapa is saying. But so you're starting to get the idea. So like this idea, so far what did Lama Tsongkhapa say? It'll protect you at the time of death, it'll purify your karma, it'll create causes of good karma, right? It'll create positive karma. It'll make you, which implies something, right? If you're saying it'll create positive karma, it means it'll make you happy in this life, and it'll make you happy in future lives, right? That if you have bodhicitta naturally, the result is you'll be happy. First of all, just as soon as you have bodhicitta, because again, like, you know, if you think of like, again, I'm just giving analogies here, but like, you know how like when we say like when somebody's young and they fall madly in love for the first time, you know, like the feeling that that person has. So a bodhisattva, I'm just giving an analogy here. A bodhisattva is like that towards everyone. Like imagine that directed at everybody in the universe, right? And that's how the bodhisattva feels as they go around throughout the day. Like so that when I say that it makes the person happy, I'm trying to give an analogy from it. I mean, there isn't really an analogy for what that's like compared to a nerding person, but can you imagine that? Like, so that everyone you met, that was the inner feeling, right? Like, head over heels, madly in love. Something like that. It's amazing, right? Like that would be the idea. So even temporarily, and then ultimately, I mean, and then not ultimately. That's just in the moment, right? And then the karma they're creating is like infinitely good, so they'll experience more and more positive things in this life and their future lives. And then he's saying those are all temporary benefits, right? Then he says, of course, the ultimate benefits are that you yourself will achieve liberation from samsara, and you'll achieve enlightenment of Buddhahood. The natural result of bodhicitta is Buddhahood itself, right? So actually the result of that, and actually earlier Lama Tsongkhapa used an epithet of the Buddha, right? The one gone to bliss, right? That's one of the descriptions of what's a Buddha. A Buddha is one gone to bliss. And so, you know, the implication of that, right, is that it means, you know, if you're thinking just of yourself, you'll be somebody who experiences, the nature of a Buddha's experience is, let's say this, unimaginable, continuous bliss. Right? So if you want to say the ultimate benefit to you will be that, right? With no suffering. That's the state of mind of a Buddha. Right? But then also, more importantly, you'll be able to benefit others and lead them to sugata, to bliss, is the idea. And you'll be able, what's there to say this? Like, also there's a kind of suffering that we have, where you want to help somebody and you don't know how to help. Right? And actually, that's like, if you are interested in helping people, then that's usually most of your experience. It's hard to help, it's hard to effectively help people, right? One of the abilities that a Buddha has is spontaneous, because of the countless eons of training in how to help others, right? They spontaneously at each moment know the most effective thing to do to help whoever they are interacting with. And so it's one of the it's related to there are fearlessnesses of the Buddhists. One fearlessness is they're fearless in knowing the most skillful methods. They know the most skillful ways of helping other people. Anyway, so that's another result of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta also, when you have bodhicitta, it said that first of all, whoever you come across, you're making them happier. Right? Then also they say that we said earlier, they were a child of the Buddhas. Just by being a bodhisattva, of course, you also please the Buddhas, right? When the Buddhas look at you and you've generated bodhicitta, they're so happy because you're helping others. You're benefiting others and you're benefiting yourself, which is what they want. So you're pleasing sentient beings, you're pleasing the Buddhas, you're happy. And actually, like, another way of saying it is any goal you have, right, temporary goal, and also your ultimate goals, will naturally come about from bodhicitta. Does that make sense, kind of, right? Because whatever is like, whether your goal, enlightenment itself, of course, but then if you have temporary goals along the way towards that, they'll naturally come about through the karmic seeds created through bodhicitta. Right? So anyway, how's that that's like an advertisement for bodhicitta, right? It's like, why generate? Because that's what Lama Tsongkhapa said, right? He's saying you have to think of the benefits, right? So it's like an advertisement. Right? So the advertisement for bodhicitta is that everything, all good things in samsara, and then all good things beyond samsara come from bodhicitta. That's really the idea. So then, and I already kind of covered this, I'll just do it very briefly, but now he says, after having understood the benefits of bodhicitta, then he goes into a little more about how, so the paths of the low and middle scope beings are prerequisites, right, to the Mahayana. That you have to cultivate those if you want to generate genuine bodhicitta. And now he goes into what I had started to explain a little more than I probably than I did, but I'll just, actually I wanted to read one part of it here, right, where he says, so now if you develop the wish to achieve the two benefits, right, that means temporary benefits of bodhicitta and also the ultimate benefits of bodhicitta. When you cultivate the beneficial mind, it's necessary, so if you want to really generate bodhicitta, he's saying you have to develop love and compassion. Right? There's no version of bodhicitta that doesn't grow out of love and compassion. Then he says something, I want to read this line, I think it's quite important. In this regard, if your body hairs don't shiver and quiver as you think about the way you yourself wander in cyclic existence, that's samsara, right? Deprived of happiness and oppressed by suffering, there is no way the inability to bear how other sentient beings are deprived of happiness and oppressed by suffering can come about. So that's quite a positive, powerful sentence, I think, right? So so think about that. He's saying, if you haven't cultivated an understanding of your own suffering to the degree that your hair stands on it, right? Like what's it say? Quiver and shiver, right? Like, if it doesn't totally freak you out, that's the way of saying that, right? When you understand the suffering that you're subject to as a samsaric being, he says, then it's impossible to generate that for others. I mean, do you hear you get what he's saying? He's saying it can't just be intellectual either, right? He's not talking about an intellectual that's, oh yes, I suffer, others suffer, that's terrible, right? That's not what he's saying here, right? He's saying like what? Like you're like, your hairs are standing on end. You're sort of like, it's a visceral, deep understanding, right? And then he quotes Shantideva. He says, and again, this is similar, so I just want to read it. In beings to whom up to now such thoughts for their own sake have not occurred, not even in their dreams, how can it arise for others? Right? And what he's saying is, what Shantideva is saying here is, right, is what is a bodhisattva aiming at? Bodhisattva is aiming at liberating all sentient beings from samsara, right? And he's saying, if you haven't even dreamt yet about liberating yourself from samsara, then if you claim, oh, I want to achieve enlightenment to liberate all beings from samsara, he says, that's just words. It doesn't, as if you haven't even had the dream of your own liberation, understanding what it means and what your suffering is in samsara, then saying, oh, I want to become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings and lead them to enlightenment, he says it's sort of, first of all, it's impossible, and secondly, it's kind of, it's silly, right? In other words, to say, I want to free others from something I don't really understand. Like, it's not going to be very genuine. And so I just want to say something here about using a different language for a moment, or using a different way of saying it. And it's this, it's, sometimes we talk about like compassion for yourself. And I think this is another way of saying what Lama Tsongkhapa is getting at here. And what he's saying in a way is, again, like he doesn't use this word, but I think it's the same idea. As long as Dalai Lama sometimes has recently used this kind of terms, is if you don't have real compassion for yourself, right, then you can't have real compassion for others. That's what he's saying. And what he's saying is, but real compassion for yourself in this sense doesn't mean like, sometimes like, I don't know, like on a superficial level, a person can say, oh, I have to have compassion for myself, I'm going to be easy on myself, and not, whatever, I don't know, go to a spa or something. I'm not against that, but that's not what he's saying, right? What he's saying is, real compassion means wishing for someone to be free from suffering. Right? And so what he's saying here is real compassion for yourself means face your own suffering and understand it with compassion, right? To the point where your hair stands on end and you quiver and you shiver and you sort of are completely, you see it so viscerally that you're deeply moved and feel, I have to achieve liberation from that, right? And then he says, then, with that powerful mind, then turn that towards, like if we get later, you'll see it. Like he said, imagine you get to that point, right, where you're feeling that way about your own suffering. He's saying, then you think, okay, so could I liberate myself, but leave my child or my parent or my closest friend to be in that suffering, right? Then you start to feel, no, I have to get them out. I have to help them also, right? And then you start expanding that outward until you encompass all beings, right? But if you don't start with an understanding of it from your own experience, then there is nothing to expand out to other beings. And so that's that idea I was saying about this idea of the flip, like Swami Lama said once, or numerous times I think. There's two sides of one coin, right? So in other words, once you understand your own suffering, then you just, you're like this, then you just flip it outward, right? And it's the same idea. So they're saying here, you have to develop renunciation of samsara, wishing to be free from samsara for yourself, in order to then develop that for others. And here is where Lama Tsongkhapa goes into more detail, right? Just this idea of I guess I'll just say just this idea that he really does go into it, right? That you have to be willing, it's just true, isn't it? If you want to develop compassion, you have to be willing to look at suffering. So I'm just warning you, so later when we go into the topics of suffering, you'll know, okay, there's a reason for it. Then he says a few more things about this idea of, anyway, okay, so you have to face the suffering of others, so you have to understand the suffering of lower realms, the wish to achieve higher rebirth, the wish to be free from samsara, and then you can apply those to yourself, and then you can apply that to others, and that's part of generating bodhicitta. Then he says also, if you want to develop bodhicitta, part of the part of the process of that, when you like, for example, in the bodhisattva vow ceremonies and so on, is taking refuge and practicing the 7 limbs, which is also part of these other trainings, right? Refuge is part of the low scope. So if you haven't trained in what refuge is, you won't be able to do that. So in other words, when it comes to the part of bodhisattva practice where you take refuge and do 7 limbs, you won't know how to do it. If you don't understand karma, then you won't understand how to purify karma. So these, in other words, you have to understand those things even as part of the actual training of a bodhisattva in that sense. And the rituals of bodhisattvas include these aspects that are part of in common with the lower and middle scope. And then he says another thing, which again is kind of in line with something I already said, but I'll just mention. He uses his own metaphor here, which is he says, I'll read this one line. Here, the spiritual master indicates how the teachings of the lesser and intermediate beings become branches of for the arising of the mind of enlightenment. And the disciple. So what he's saying here, right? If you can read the whole paragraph if you want, but is that we shouldn't let our training, let's say the low scope, right? That we shouldn't let it be disconnected from our bodhicitta practice, right? And so I guess, so if you think of like bodhicitta as the main practice, right? But these are branches of that practice, right? Or so like if you're training in how do I not go to lower realms myself, that's not disconnected. He's saying, you could view that like you could view that as a separate, like some, one thing over here and there's the bodhisattva practice over there. He's saying that's a mistake. He says it's better to view it like the main tree is you're practicing the bodhisattva practice. But then this idea, for example, of when I'm practicing, when we're practicing a practice motivated to have a good future rebirth, that's one of the branches of that tree, right? It's connected to our bodhicitta. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see. Should we, I'll just pause. Any questions up to that point before I get to the next heading? Any comments or questions? Keep going.
Just one point. I mean, the whole point is that it's the path, right? All these things are part of the path. To go to Ohio first to get to California, that's the path you need to take to get to California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So each of these branches is part of the path.
Yeah.
It's a necessary part of the path.
Yeah, it's a necessary part. That's really important. And then, okay, so then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say, how do you do, so he's kind of clarifying something which I think is good for people to know still. So, so in terms of bodhicitta, right, what he's saying is, you're going to do these other practices and and then he says, you're going to give rise eventually, first we're going to have to give rise to what he calls, first we're going to have to give rise actually to contrived bodhicitta, right, which is where you kind of, it's not spontaneous, it's not natural, because we're not yet bodhisattvas, but we think, right? We think about the suffering of others, we go through like the idea, like there are different trainings for giving rise to bodhicitta. There's a 7-point cause and effect method where you think about, it's grounded in this idea of viewing other sentient beings as the kind mothers from past lives, and then there's the equalizing and exchanging self for others, where you recognize how everybody's the same and wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. You recognize the faults of your own self-centeredness, and you switch. Whereas you decide to cherish others instead of being self-centered. Anyways, so at first we have to do those things in a contrived way, through effort, right? Contemplating over and over and trying to give rise to that and sort of giving rise to some facsimile of it, and then sort of building on that and trying to get some habituation to it. Then he says, after a while, you'll start to get periods where it's uncontrived, right, where it becomes more natural to you. But that only happens through making all that effort. Does that make sense? It's not going to happen just because you say, like, definitely, if you just say, may I have bodhicitta, you won't develop bodhicitta from that. You know, if you, whatever, put a slogan up on your wall, that's nice, but that won't give you rise to bodhicitta. You know, the only way to give rise to bodhicitta is by effort. So anyway, and then as you continue to do that, it'll become uncontrived for periods of time, and then it'll become more and more habituated until it becomes your natural way of being in the world, and that's what you're bodhisattva. Right? Then he talks about the bodhisattva vow, and he points out there are two types of bodhisattva vows. So what he's saying is, along that process of developing bodhicitta, when you feel ready, this is important to understand. Like, so this is advice for you yourself from Lama Tsongkhapa, right? What he's saying is, for you yourself, as you do this process of cultivating bodhicitta, there will come a point where you really have a deep appreciation for bodhicitta, and you're able to give rise to some degree of it. And he says then at some point it'd be good to take the aspiring bodhisattva vow. Right? And that means like there's a ritual where you go to a lama and you do this ritual where basically the ritual means something though. What it means is you're making a commitment at that point to say, I want to really practice to be a bodhisattva. You're not yet, like, it's aspiring at that point, right? You're saying that's what I want to do. And like you go to a lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama often gives this vow, and other lamas do too. And so you actually go there and you say, I want to officially take the bodhisattva vow, the aspiring bodhisattva vow at this point. And there's a ritual where you take refuge and you visualize, His Holiness often does that, or you visualize the Buddha and all different bodhisattvas in space around you and your lamas there, and you say some prayer, and you follow what the lama says and you repeat after them. But the meaning of it is you're saying, I've decided that's my aspiration. And one thing that's interesting about bodhisattva vows is other vows, like for example, a layperson's vows, of a Buddhist, or monk vows, or nun vows, are for this life. They're until the vow is until I die. The bodhisattva vow is not just for this life. You take a vow until you become enlightened. So it's a vow, you're making a vow for this life and all your future lives at that point. Saying, I vow to aspire towards bodhicitta from now until the end of time, until I'm enlightened, and I'll still manifest to benefit others. So, and then he says, having taken the aspiring bodhisattva vow by means of a ritual, he says then practice his trainings, right? So you continue to train in bodhicitta, and you train in certain, there are like descriptions of things to do once you've taken the aspiring bodhisattva vow. He says, time and again develop the wish to train in the conduct, the 6 perfections, and so on, and the 4 ways of gathering disciples. Anyway, and then what he's getting at is, so having taken the aspiring bodhisattva vow, you continue training, right, in your bodhisattva practice. And then this is, because this is clear, this is Lama Tsongkhapa giving you advice that you then get to decide for yourself when you're ready to do this, right? So he's saying, and then once you're really ready, then there's something called the, sometimes they call it the engaging bodhisattva vow, or the train in the, I forget what he calls it here, train in the wish vow, the engaging mind, so he calls it the engaging bodhisattva vow. And so there's another, when you're ready for that, you go again back to your lama, or, your lama, or, some, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, or different lamas. And there's a different vow you take, where you say, now not only is that my wish, up to the first vow was aspiring, saying, may I always practice bodhicitta, I vow to strive for that, and so on, and not to give up on bodhicitta, not to give up on not to give up on helping others, not to give up on any sentient being, no matter how bad they are, or how difficult it is to help them. That's my vow, right? Then there's the engaging bodhisattva vow. So at that point, the person goes back and takes a further vow, right? Where the person says, now I will actually train in the 6 perfections. I'll actually do these practices of cultivating generosity, ethics, patience, and so on. And then there are again, there are trainings that are taught. There are root vows and auxiliary vows. There are descriptions. There are things like, if you've taken the engaging bodhisattva vow, there are things like, you don't then put other people down. And if somebody's really sick and needs your help, you don't ignore them. And if somebody's deeply in need, you don't blow them off. If you've taken the bodhisattva vow, there are lists of things that you just well, the Buddha said, well, of course, if you're trying to be a bodhisattva, don't do these, this list of things to do and to avoid like that, which are about, trainings in compassion, basically, right? And so there comes a point where if you want to practice the bodhisattva training, where you should take that vow at some point when you feel ready. Does that make sense? So this is important because, again, like, let's just say it, like sometimes you'll be at a teaching or an event and somebody will say, oh, there's a bodhisattva vow, and if nobody's ever explained this to you, you won't know what that is. So Lama Tsongkhapa here is explaining. At some point, and it's really important, like nobody else can tell you, you should, they can tell you if they want, but it's a very personal decision, right? You have to decide, do I want to take the aspiring bodhisattva vow? Am I ready? Am I ready to take the engaging bodhisattva vow? And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to do. But so he's saying, you have to decide when to do that. But he's encouraging you to do that at some point. And I'll mention also something, just so you know, is sometimes the bodhisattva vow itself is given as its own ritual, its own process. Then also, because remember I said earlier, Vajrayana, or tantra mantra, secret mantra, is a branch of the Mahayana, right? So when lamas give initiations, sometimes you'll see like flyers, or our center will send out emails, or something. A lama's coming and giving an initiation. And because those initiations are Vajrayana, or tantric, or Mahayana, what do you call it, Mantrayana, secret mantra, or Vajrayana initiations, they're a branch of the Mahayana, right? They're part of Mahayana practice. And almost, I think always, actually, always, at the beginning of such initiations, the Lama gives the bodhisattva vow. The idea being that you shouldn't do this practice. If you're not, those Vajrayana practices are for somebody who's ready to take that vow. And so, again, sometimes people go and they don't know, if somebody doesn't really know what bodhisattva vow is, then they go to an initiation, and the Lama says, now I'm going to give the bodhisattva vow, and they say something, and the person repeats, and they don't know that they just took the bodhisattva, or sometimes people don't realize it. But so, actually, it's true, all initiations include the bodhisattva vow. So again, when you see those, if you see an initiation, two things. One is if you're interested in that, let's say if you're interested in that practice, like this initiation of the practice of Tara, or Avalokiteshvara, or some other practice like that, if you're interested in that practice, then you can take it, and also it's a way of receiving the bodhisattva. If you haven't received the bodhisattva vow before, and you want to, then that's one opportunity to receive it. The other thing is that if you have received it before and you haven't practiced that well, you can renew it at that time. You can sort of go and say, okay, I'm going to try harder now. I've been trying some, but I've done only so, and now I get to sort of renew my bodhisattva vow and try harder to get better and better, which is, so. Does that make sense? So that's an opportunity to take that vow. There are other opportunities that are not related to Vajrayana, but it's always there. So it doesn't always, oftentimes when it says, oh, this Lama, the Lama's giving a initiation of such and such practice, Tara, let's say, it doesn't say this will include the bodhisattva vow, usually, but it's because it's sort of, but now you know that it does. It's been done. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says, once you've taken the bodhisattva vows, don't break them. And there again, we can go into more about that and so on. But sometime it's not in this. Someday we could even study the vows if you want. Like this, if people take it, then we can actually study it together. So, but he's saying, keep the vow, don't break the vow. It's very important because it's your spiritual training. And the bodhisattva vow, sometimes people don't realize this. Like, I want to say that also. Like, I noticed that, if somebody becomes, let's say, a Buddhist monk or a nun, right? They shave their head and they put on different clothing, and then, and at that point, if the person were to, so Buddhist monks and nuns, for example, don't, they're celibate and they don't drink alcohol. There are certain vows, right? And so, if a person took the monk, let's say a monk or a nun vow, right? And then they went out and they're supposed to be celibate and not drink alcohol, and then they went out and got drunk and had sex with somebody. It would be shocking, right? Oh my goodness, this monk or nun did that. And sometimes I think now I want to say, this is important to know, first of all, they should do that, right? It's very important. It kind of defeats the purpose of taking the vow. But from a Buddhist perspective, taking the bodhisattva vow is considered even more important than taking the monk or nun vow. And that's not that it's like, not that monks or nuns vows are not important, they're usually important. But the bodhisattva vow is even, it's a great scope, right? It's a great, it's the aspiration to Buddhahood itself, right? But because, I think sometimes people have the mistaken idea, like, oh yeah, I went to this ritual, and the Dalai Lama recited some words, and I visualized Buddhas and bodhisattvas. It was really cool. You know, the bodhisattva said, and the Dalai Lama said, be a good person or something, you know. And they don't then go study what the vows are, and then they don't think it's a big deal to break them, like, because they don't even study what they are, right? And it's just, like, in other words, from a Buddhist perspective, it's worse, actually, than that. It's worse than if you were to become a nun and then go get drunk and, you know, whatever, have a sexual relationship with somebody, versus taking the bodhisattva vow and then breaking it. That's worse. So, like, what he's saying is, he says, that's why he says, even at the risk of your life, don't do that. He's saying, like, understand how important that is. That this is a vow you've taken from now, not just for this life, but until you become a Buddha, for all your future lives. He's saying it's an important vow. It's a vow. It's the vow of compassion, right? It's the most important thing. He's saying if you take that vow, it's the most important thing, actually, right, in your life. And he's saying, so study it and don't break those vows, because they're the vow of your heart, in a way, right? They're the vow of your, for this and all time, you know, to become enlightened, and to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And so, again, I just think people, like, I don't know, it's like people sort of think, oh, I went to this thing, because there's not, like, a change of clothes or a change of appearance, people don't sometimes contemplate, oh, that's like, it's a life-changing moment, right? If you say, I'm now, from this point forward, vowing to practice the bodhisattva path, right? I mean, that's more than a life-changing moment. It's like, you could say, like, in a person's, like, I don't know, over many lifetimes or something, you know, you could say, like, that's a turning point. You know? The point where a person, up to that point, the person never did that. And then there comes a point where the person vows, from now until all time, I'll practice the bodhisattva conduct. And even if it takes me eons of time, I'll become a Buddha. That's like the biggest spiritual turning point in a person's existence. I don't want to say life, because it implies something too small. And so you get, like, so again, it could seem, I don't know, like, if somebody hasn't thought deeply about it, then when Lama Tsongkhapa says, even at the risk of your life, don't break the person, go, oh, he's just being, I don't know, something like. But it's implied, right? He's saying it's that important, right? It's like, this is the, you know, and because what are those vows? Like, one, I mean, I'll just give one example. One is, in your heart, don't completely give up on any suffering being, right? That doesn't mean you can, in that moment, help every being. You know, you may not be capable of helping a certain being, but in your heart to feel, someday I'd like to lead this being to enlightenment, right? Not to give up on them in that sense, right? You may say, right now I'm not capable of helping this person, but someday may I be able to, right? You know, so, so one way of breaking the bodhisattva, if you were to say, I want to enlighten all beings, but not that one. Like, may they, you know, what is that saying? They go to hell, right? If you said, may they go to hell, I don't care. That then you've fully broken your, right? At that moment you broke it. You know, it's like, if you really in your heart say, everybody else I'll help, but them I don't care. They can go to hell and I'd be happy. You've broken your bodhi, right? You've broken your bodhisattva. That's an example. At that moment you broke your bodhisattva. He's saying, don't do that, right? Whereas your vow is, I'm going to enlighten all sentient beings. That's my aspiration, right? Your compassion includes all sentient beings, right? And your wish to benefit includes all sentient beings. So I'm just giving an example, right? So he's saying, guard that state of mind. And then he's saying, if you do make small mistakes, then purify them. Right? Because we're not perfect, we're going to make small mistakes. So he says, if you make small mistakes, then do countermeasures, right? It means, purify it and so on. And then he says, and then also train in the six perfections, right? The essence of the bodhisattva vow is to train in the six perfections. So he's saying, once you've taken the bodhisattva vows, he says, then, do your best to train in those six perfections. And he says, including concentration. So that's one of the six perfections, right? He particularly mentions including developing your ability to develop calm abiding or single-pointed concentration. And then he says, calm abiding, right, this state of mind of deep, very deep meditative concentration, where you can keep your mind on one object as long as you want. with a kind of sense of bliss and flexibility and light. That your mind is kind of quite, it's deeply concentrated while also being very energized. He says that gives rise to clairvoyance, naturally, as a side effect of that kind of mind. And then he says, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is you can then conjoin that mind with special insight, wisdom, understanding emptiness, and you can develop, exalted states of mind through that. Okay, so actually, people, any questions about the Bodhisattva vow? He's covered that now a little bit here, this idea of the Bodhisattva vow. Is that clear? Anything about that before we go on? Because next, I'll go through this a little bit quickly, these two parts. Then he's kind of now, there's just two paragraphs here where he's kind of just doing, not just, but he's giving a, almost like categorizations now. This is just for your understanding, so maybe we'll go through it just so people understand. But one is, he says, one way of categorizing all these different teachings is according to the three trainings. And again, this is a categorization issue, and this comes from, he's quoting from this particular text, or not quoting from, but referencing it. But does anybody know what are the three trainings? The three higher trainings? Concentration. Wisdom. One more. The foundation for those two. Oh, that's concentration. She said concentration and meditation. That's one of them. Yeah. No, so it's saying, yeah, you're right. That's good. There's one. So one is meditative concentration. Another is wisdom. The other is ethics. Ethics. And so. So basically, one thing that Lama Tsongkhapa is here saying is that there are different ways of categorizing. So one is those three trainings. That's one way of categorizing the Buddha's teachings. Is there are three? They sometimes call them three higher trainings. The higher training in ethics, in concentration, and in wisdom. And he's saying, all these different teachings that are in this that the Buddha taught. One way of categorizing them is according to those three trainings, right? So, for example, then all the trainings in compassion and love and bodhicitta would be subsumed under the ethics, right? That's the part of the ethics of a bodhisattva, and so on. Ethics also includes things like avoiding killing and stealing and so on, right? And then concentration would be all the different meditative states that one can achieve, and then wisdom would be, many different kinds of wisdom. The most important of which being the wisdom of the ultimate truth or the ultimate nature of reality. And so he's saying one way of categorizing all these trainings that I'm giving is you can understand them in terms of the three higher trainings. Then he says another way of categorizing all of these different trainings is according to the trainings in the conventional, or so he uses different synonyms here. He calls it either the training in merit, or the path of conventional, based on conventional truths, or the vast path. But basically what he's saying is, another way of categorizing is a twofold, that was a threefold, right? The three higher trainings. He's just giving another way of categorizing. He says, I'll just use two simple terms. Another way of categorizing all Buddhist teachings is according to method and wisdom. So method, can include all these different trainings. And so the trainings of the everything from guarding karma, taking refuge, the nature of samsara, the aspiration to be liberated from samsara, how to generate bodhicitta, the first 5 perfections. All of those are method, the method aspect of the path. And then, in this sense, in this case, wisdom is the wisdom understanding. Emptiness is the other aspect of the path. So he just says that's another way of categorizing all the teachings is according to these two, which is a very meaningful way, which we can get into. Sometimes they talk about the path to Buddhahood is the two accumulations. So accumulating method and accumulating wisdom. So most of these different methods are to accumulate merit, and then the training in wisdom, understanding emptiness, is to accumulate wisdom, and it's those two that give rise to Buddhahood. So it's just another way of categorizing all these trainings, and you'll see that in other texts. So it's good that you know it or have heard it. And then maybe the last thing we'll talk about is that, because now he has this section here on Mantrayana, right, or Vajrayana. And I said I would get back to that, so we'll get back to it now in the last 15 minutes and cover this little section, then we'll stop for today. Oh, and remind me before we stop, I mean, at the very end I want to check on the schedule with people, everybody, but, okay, so now he says, having trained your continuum, meaning your mind, by means of the common paths, you must enter the Mantrayana. For once you have entered it, you will quickly complete the two collections. So I just said, right, the collection, that's where that previous paragraph, they connect up. Right? The collection of merit and the collection of wisdom. So what he's saying here is, I said this earlier, right, quickly, right? Whereas it's a faster path to enlightenment if you practice Mantrayana. And it's interesting, actually, it's interesting, he says you must enter. So he's encouraging us, right? Then he says something, then he says something slightly different, where he says, if you can't manage that, right, if you can't manage practicing Mantrayana, due to the small power of your lineage, right, meaning like you don't have, you somehow don't have the, lineage in this sense doesn't mean your family lineage. It means your like spiritual lineage. Like, so if somehow you don't have enough, you could say enough merit, or you could say enough aspiration, whereas if you don't have the sort of karmic potential or the sort of the aspiration, if it's not in your heart to feel I want to achieve enlightenment quickly for all sentient beings, and you don't have that kind of level of aspiration, then he says. So first he says you must enter Vajrayana, right, Mantrayana. Then he says if you can't because you don't have the inner capacity, he says then practice the six perfections as best you can, and expand that more and more, right? So he says, so he's kind of, he's giving you, he's encouraging people to practice Mantrayana, and he's also giving an out if you just don't have, he says, or if you don't want to, right? So if you somehow don't have that aspiration. So you get the message there, he's sort of really encouraging the practice of Mantrayana, but he's saying, it's also your choice. And then he says a few things about Vajrayana or Mantrayana that I just want to explain, because again, it's sort of like he's giving an education here, so you understand. And this very much applies to us, because you have to decide this for yourselves, right? Whereas just like you get, just like earlier I said, you get to decide if you want to take the Bodhisattva vow or not. Definitely nobody can say you have to take the, I'm forcing you to take the Bodhisattva. Right? You have to decide for yourself, is that who you are? So the same thing with Mantrayana, right? And what he's saying is, if you have an interest in Mantrayana, in Vajrayana, he says, first of all, there are a few things you have to know then. One is, we went through this earlier in this text, right? That in any Buddhist training, proper reliance on a spiritual teacher is important, right? We went through that already. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says, and that's particularly true in Mantrayana, whereas that you need a teacher for any of these trainings, but for Mantrayana, a teacher is absolutely indispensable, and you really have to have a good relationship to the teacher. So don't just go to anybody to study Mantrayana. You have to really have trust in that person. Just like all the qualities we talked about, there are more even qualities that are sometimes listed in other texts for a teacher of Mantrayana. But the idea being that you should really find somebody who you can rely on well, and then you should relate to them very well, because they're very important. They're important in all aspects of spiritual practice, and Mantrayana they're very important. So he says, so first thing is you have to find a teacher and rely on them well. And then he says, but to enter Mantrayana, there's something required, which is an initiation or empowerment, he says, that comes from a pure Tantra class. He says, and then you take certain vows and commitments at the time of initiation. And so what he's saying here is that you can't, it's impossible. You cannot practice the Vajrayana without an initiation. And so you have to receive that initiation from a teacher, so a teacher is indispensable. Right? And then he mentions pure Tantra classes, and he goes into this a little more, so I'll just very briefly mention. So there are 4 different classes or levels of tantric practice, Vajrayana or Mantrayana practice. So there's, and they each have their own initiations. That's why. So and each one has many actually within it. So the first of the 4, which is action tantra, they call it. Then the second is performance tantra. the third is yoga. And they go up, you know, so then the second highest of them, or something, whatever you want to call it, second highest, I guess, is Yoga Tantra. And then there's the highest or unsurpassed Yoga Tantra. That's the peak of these four. And so what he's getting at is that each of those four have their own initiations. I mean, within any of those four, there are numerous or many different initiations. And so you can choose which one, but you have to receive some initiation if you want to practice Vajrayana. And then during the initiation process, the teacher will give certain commitments, and like he says, vows or commitments, and you keep those. Just to be clear, so people understand, because sometimes you'll see flyers, and it's up to you if you go, and people don't necessarily explain it to you. So I'll say this too. Most of the initiations that are given, to be honest, actually, most of the initiations are either the first of the four, Action Tantra, or the highest Yoga Tantra. There are a few initiations given in the Tibetan masters have of those two middle classes. So you do see those occasionally. Most of the ones you see though are Action Tantra or highest Yoga Tantra. But this is an important point, that in Action Tantra and Performance Tantra, the main vows and commitments are the Bodhisattva vow, which I already mentioned. And then sometimes they'll give a commitment to say some mantras or to do a certain practice, but there aren't extensive vows and commitments. For Yoga Tantra and highest Yoga Tantra, especially for highest Yoga Tantra, then there are a whole list of other Vajrayana or tantric vows, and so you can study those if you want to take that level of initiation. Has its own commitments to it that are unique to that kind of tantra or Vajrayana. But so he's saying, if you decide, he's encouraging you to consider the mantrayana when you're ready for that, and then he's saying, if you're going to do that, you have to go to initiation, receive it, and I'll say something else. Like, if you're going to do that, this is my own input. But it's correct. You do have to take an initiation if you decide you want to do that. But also, it's very good to do it in a context where you can also get some teaching, on whatever you. Because if you get an initiation into a certain practice of tantra, because sometimes there's situations where, say a high lama comes into town and gives an initiation and leaves. And then if you don't get a chance to study it at all, you don't know. You did receive the initiation, so that's something, but you didn't get to. If you don't know what to do with that at all, then it's difficult. So if you can, it's good to get a situation where you can receive the initiation, but then either from the lama or from somebody get some instruction, so you know how to do the practice. That's of course more beneficial, because then you can actually engage in the practices. And so anyway, so then he says, if you take those vows and of course keep them well, he says. Because this is what he's saying now. What I was just getting at about this idea of the instructions is he says here, you should be guided as appropriate. Then you should be guided as appropriate in the yoga with signs in accordance with the lowest tantra classes, or the yoga of generation stage in accordance with the higher tantra classes. So he's saying what I just said, which is, if you take an initiation, you should get some instruction, right? That's what he's saying here. And he's saying something, in the lower tantras, you start off with a practice called the yoga with signs. And he's saying you have to learn what that is once you receive the initiation. Or if you're doing highest yoga tantra, then you begin with something called the generation stage. And so if you take an initiation, what's really good and very important is to get instruction. So let's say, if you were doing, I'll give an example with the lower, one of the action tantra, the lower tantra, right? That might be like a practice of green tara, or of white tara, or of avalokiteshvara, or miktukpa. There are many different practices. There's some of the pictures here where there's white tara on the far side there. So he's saying, if you receive that, then try to receive instruction on the yoga with signs, and then do that practice, because that's the actual practice to make progress on that path. Then if you're going to receive, on the other hand, if you're going to receive the highest yoga tantra initiation, like for example into Guhya Samaja, the name of the center, right, is named after a highest yoga tantra practice, the Guhya Samaja practice. Then he's saying, then you should try to receive instructions on what's called the generation stage, which is the first stage of practice of highest yoga tantra. And he says, then you do that practice. So that's quite straightforward. And then he says, once you've done that for a while and made some progress, then eventually it's good to receive. So each of the tantras has like two parts. So if in the lower tantras there's yoga with signs and then the yoga without signs. And so he's saying receive instruction in both, but you do them in order. You start with the yoga with signs, then you do without. Or if you're doing highest yoga tantra, you start with the generation stage and then the completion stage. So like that. Does that make sense? So it's just saying you get the idea. So if you receive the initiation, you know, if you can ask the Lama, great. If not, then ask somebody. You know, what are the vows and commitments, and is there a practice to do? And how do I do the practice? And, you know, you can learn that, and then you can do the practice. And the idea is that the whole point is that remember, why would somebody do that? Right? It's to achieve enlightenment more quickly. That's all. So there are practices that allow you to progress more quickly in your process of training in the conduct of a bodhisattva. Okay, and then he says, so this is the general structure of presenting the path. So there, he's just, you know, he's gone through all of that, and he said, so this is the general overall structure of how you practice, right? Is you're going to do all these other practices. They're leading up to the generation of bodhicitta. And then bodhicitta, once you realize bodhicitta, and I want to say one more thing, just practice advice for a moment, and then we'll stop. Is so really the key here is the key thing is the whole point is you're trying to generate bodhicitta, actual uncontrived bodhicitta, right? All these other trainings are for that, right? And he's saying once you get to that level where you generate bodhicitta, then what's left is you have to go ahead and become Buddha, right? And he's saying, so then either practice the 6 perfections, which are taught in this text, or practice those as well as mantrayana, to progress more quickly. But all of that is grounded in bodhicitta. Does that make sense? So it's like most of this text is going to be everything leading up to and how to develop bodhicitta. And then from that point forward, he's saying either then, you know, go ahead and just practice 6 perfections, or practice 6 perfections and also add on mantrayana and progress more quickly. But that's the structure of the path. Does that make sense? So he's been kind of giving us an overview and saying, and you get the whole point. I'm not going to say it again. You know, you get why he's doing all of that, right? In part, it's so that you can keep that in mind as you do these other practices. And so next time we'll just go through a very brief section on the purpose of that, the purpose of all of this, and then we'll go into we'll start on the path of the lowest. Right, we're going to go in order, like a ladder. So we'll start with the path of the lowest capable being. Okay, any questions? Covered a lot today. So before we stop, I want to